everybody. Welcome. Green Apron Alliance welcomes each and every one of you. This is going to be a great conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys can put yourselves on mute, we're going to ask that we keep it restricted to the panel for right now, but your comments, your questions, your insights are more than welcome, and we'd love to hear from you through the chat channel. So Alex and Courtney are going to be manning the booth there, if you will, for collecting all the feedback. So again, welcome everyone. This meeting is being recorded. But with that being said, we like to remind everyone that this is a safe space and this is a safe place for all of us to participate and share. It's incredible that we are so honored to have an incredible group of people to share this conversation. Even in the prep sessions and even doing basic minimal research for this, I learned a ton, and I'm just so excited about what we're going to explore together today. So thank you all for joining us. If you haven't already, please make sure your profile is set up on the Green Apron Alliance. It's important for us to be able to find you and to be able to connect with you and share in other ways with you. Just before I kick it over to our esteemed host, Lisa Smith, or Sunshine, as we like to call her on our team, Sunshine will be taking us through a really good conversation, but we're here today to learn a little bit more about our brothers and sisters across this great country. And I was surprised to find out how incredibly diverse Asian population is today in the United States. 23 million Asian Americans trace their roots to more than 20 countries, and that's just incredible. And by 2060, the population is to double. So we are blessed to have you guys here with us, and I will turn it over to Lisa and her incredible powers to start an incredible conversation. So thank you and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Marie. Thanks, everyone. As always, it is just such a pleasure to see so many beautiful faces and words where you guys don't want to show your faces, but thank you so much. As Marie said, this really is a safe place, safe space for us. We're all on this incredible journey, and I am so glad that we are not in a fixed mindset that we learned when we had Dolly Chu join us, but we are all in a growth mindset. And this is just a fantastic opportunity to continue growing and learning together as a community and really standing in support of one another. And nothing gives me greater pleasure to end my day than to gather with all of my alums and to really engage in this conversation. What I would say is that I would just want to echo what Marie said. We definitely want this to be interactive. So if you have a question, pop it in the chat. Alex will make sure that I see it and can ask it of our panelists. Or you can ask her directly and she will make sure that it gets to me. As a moderator, I love to see faces. So if you're comfortable with popping on your camera, I welcome it. I'd love to see your reactions. Christine, I'm hella jealous that you're in the sunshine right now, but a girl can take it. And Ben, hi, nice to see you. My fellow teammate there when I was at Starbucks. So before I get going, let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed panel. I am so delighted to be in company of these four fabulous people. Two of them are returning panelists. You may recognize them in Katherine Cheng. I please make sure I'm saying your names right. And James. And then my fellow board members, Annie and Stella. So those are panelists, but let me read you their impressive bios so you know what we're kind of really in for a treat. So Stella is currently a senior HR director with Pepsi Beverages. Stella has 15 years of experience in human resources and has held human resource roles at progressive scope and responsibility in various organizations such as Target, US Foods, and of course, Starbucks. She serves as a member on the Green Apron Alliance. I mentioned that earlier. What's interesting about Stella is she came to the United States at 5 years old from Jakarta in Indonesia. And as Marie mentioned earlier, the Asian diaspora is huge. And so when I learned that about Stella, I was like, oh, snap, I've got so much more to learn. And she now calls Southern California home. She is an immigrant and the first in her family to graduate from college and has established a career path in business. Welcome, everyone, Stella. Next up is Annie. Annie is currently Senior Talent Engagement Partner for SWIFT and co-leader for the BIPOC ERG. BIPOC standing for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. She's on the board of One OC, the largest nonprofit in Southern California, connecting business with nonprofits to strengthen the community. Annie is also on the board mentioned earlier, and Annie herself is also an immigrant from Vietnam and has spent her entire life helping underrepresented groups gain more visibility. Welcome, Annie. Katherine, my partner in crime. Love me some Katherine. Love everybody, but love me some Katherine. Katherine is head of global and community impact at Expedia Group. Katherine oversees CSR strategy, sustainability, corporate grants, and employee giving. Take a breath. Katherine's professional chops include international business, strategic communications, and reputation management at some of the world's most iconic brands, including Microsoft and Starbucks, and was with the US government, working with the Clinton, Obama, and Biden administrations. She serves as vice president of the board of trustees for the Wing Luke Museum right here in Seattle, and is on the board of trustees for the Seattle Center Foundation, the YWCA Seattle King County, and vice chair of the Community Development Roundtable. Welcome, Katherine. And James. Hi, James. James is currently the director of D&I at Alaska Airlines. And if you guys have been following anything on LinkedIn, they just unveiled an amazing aircraft. And I'll let him speak to that when that time comes. Prior to that, he was in the world of wine at Chateau Ste. Michelle right here in Seattle, serving as its first ever director of inclusion, equity, and diversity. He previously spent years leading D&I for Starbucks and of course 20 years at Nordstrom. He has served on a few nonprofit boards that include Seattle Goodwill, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Puget Sound, Choices Education Group, and currently serves as a board member for City Year of King County. So welcome our esteemed panelists. Yay, thank you for joining us this afternoon. So let's, as we have coined this is going to be a conversation hopefully in 3 parts. We're going to be talking about race, we're going to be talking about culture, and we're going to be talking about allyship. And while it may be in 3 parts, it's probably going to be a conversation that spans all 3 of those categories throughout the course of our discussion today. As a reminder, drop your questions in the chat so that I can add them to the suite of questions that I already want to ask. And so to kick off, I really want to kick off our conversation by grounding us in what is AAPI. And as we know, May is AAPI Heritage Month, and we want to kind of have a baseline for what is AAPI, what is the origin, how did we get here? And I would love for Katherine to kick us off in grounding us in what that is.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here. So I think that I'm going to start with just talking about the last several months, and in particular the last several weeks. It's been pretty hard just watching all the anti-Asian sentiment and anti-hate, and I think it'll lead into why AAPI Heritage Month actually was a thing, became a thing many years ago. But you know, the last several weeks in particular, you know, we've seen a lot of anti-Asian hate and sentiment, and a lot of it has been blamed on Asians being silent or invisible. And I would contest that that's not true at all. That we've always had a place and a voice, but it's a conscious choice for others to not see or hear Asians. And so while these incidents are not new, they are deep-seated in portrayals of Asians in media, from the sexualization of Asian women to the emasculation of Asian men in movies and constant otherization of both. So I think that this is not, again, anything new. There's a long history of Asians, and these stereotypes drive what happened in reporting and prosecution of hate crimes and how the public sees Asians in general. We aren't stereotypes. We're real people with stories. We're generations in the US and to recent immigrants and refugees. But we are a diverse population, and we actually represent more than 50 countries in addition to Pacific Island nations. And we're also very diverse in our makeup. We're part Black, part white, part Latinx, part Native American, et cetera. And we belong here. And so I think that the history of AAPI Heritage Month was to identify and recognize it. And that's why I think that the fact that there is an AAPI Heritage Month and has been for many years now is testament to the fact that we do belong here, and there's a representation. So I just wanted to lay the groundwork on that as to why we are here, and so I'm grateful that we are having this conversation.
Thanks, Katherine. I want to piggyback on that. I grew up in Hawaii, and I have, a really blended family. And I would want to say that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are probably very different and distinct groups in terms of their experience and their impact on who we are as a country, our culture. And I was wondering, James, if you can jump in a little bit and share any additional context or history around that dichotomy between AA and the PI side of the house.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and a pleasure to be here, everyone. I don't know how much context I can add to it, but I can share with you that, as I was really starting my journey here at Alaska, our PIA Business Resource Group, which is our Pacific Islander Business Resource Group, was really intentional in, as much of the things that were happening in society around kind of Asian American hate, they were really very vocal with us to say that, the PI experience is very different than the Asian American experience. And that while we both, technically fall under that Asian category, we really consider ourselves different communities. We're not experiencing the same experience as Asian Americans. And we really want to be separate. And so as we were even thinking about sending out communication to really show our solidarity and support, we got a lot of feedback from our Pacific Islander employees that said, we really would rather you not do that because our experience is different. And so, I think that's where, I'd really also love to hear from our other panelists around, what's kind of been your experience in kind of understanding that separation and difference between Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans, because, for me, that was a learning for me, because I've always grouped AA and PI together in everything that I've done in this work. And I've been practicing this work for over 13 years. It was only just this year that, I got this learning moment that, that community really does consider themselves separate and don't want to be included in kind of those same conversations and experiences because they're very different.
Annie, I see you nodding. Did you want to jump in and add to that?
Sure. I was just going to share that I'm Vietnamese and Chinese Hawaiian. And so, speaking to my Hawaiian family and friends, and also it's a little conflicting for me because I wanted to share that I have experienced a lot of racism, and people are surprised. They're like, oh, you live in Irvine, California. It's very diverse there, large Asian population. You must not experience anything. And I can say in the last week, there have been 3 incidents within walking distance of my house of a young woman, Korean woman getting beat up at a skate park, older Asian gentleman getting beat up as well. And then a woman videotaped a gentleman spewing hate, saying, go back to your country, you don't belong here. So it's really shocking for me. And it's helped frame the discussion with my kids, because they do more associate themselves as they're biracial. So European from their father and then Asian from my side. But it is interesting because the Hawaiian family and friends don't face it as much. And I think it's partially because my Hawaiian friends, they're kind of admired. Hawaii is a place we want to go to. It's there's a mythical thing about it. So the people of Hawaii are kind of looked upon as a tropical place to go for vacation. They're associated with that. And then I've had people say to me, you know, many times about Kung flu and the China virus. And so that's associated with the Chinese Vietnamese side of my heritage, where they believe it's because we eat, you know, bats and crazy things, that's what caused, you know, the China virus, according to them. So it's been pretty tough and honestly very emotional having these tough discussions with my kids about safety, about not going out by themselves, and just, you know, the topic of racism. It's never easy to have with your children.
Yeah, you raise a good point around the vitriol that was created last year and the impact that has had on us. And I was wondering, Stella, if you could share, like, how does that impact you, where you live, how you navigate your world today?
Yeah, I think there's just the hypersensitivity to all the events and all the intensity that's happening around you. It kind of makes you question like the security around you. So kind of like Annie, I grew up in a hometown that was, you know, there was a fairly moderate, large size of Asians in that population in the schools that I grew up in. But then you see all this hate around you and it makes you wonder like who's lurking, right, in society. I actually remember, you know, when my elementary school, I remember way early on in my childhood, my elementary school had more Asians. I went to a different elementary school for like a summer school one summer, but then I was more of the minority because that elementary school had more Hispanics, for example. And I remember vividly, like there were some kids, like Hispanic kids, that I think were like picking at me because I was more different at the time. And so early on, just even kind of feeling like the difference, but this was only like miles apart, you know? And then today, of course, you have thoughts in your head, like, is it worth going out to this thing, or is something going to happen to you, right? And then my parents recently made a comment about how they came here to the United States and made all their sacrifice for a better life. And yet it's ironic because this is what we're facing, you know, today in this world, and this is what the country is like. So yeah, I'll share that. And then one other item to piggyback on what James said earlier, my high school had a very strong like presence of Filipinos, community of Filipinos. And I do actually remember that they like took offense when you lumped them in with Asians. So like in the surveys, demographics, etc., they were looking for that Pacific Islander like category. So it was interesting that James noted that earlier, because I think there's like definitely sensitivity around there too.
And then can I add a point also in there, Lisa? One of the things that, you know, Stella, you know, I've also heard, and I shared this with Lisa, that I've been, you know, kind of on this journey of learning too, is there's even a kind of a separation between kind of North Asian and South Asian. And, you know, obviously there's skin color comes into play, you know, with that. And I remember having an employee on my team when I worked at Nordstrom that was Japanese American, and she really had to kind of walk me through that difference between North Asian and South Asian, which I honestly had no idea, you know, just the dichotomy of what that meant, and all of kind of the tension and things that are still kind of playing out to this day in just kind of some of the way those countries and populations interact. So I'd love it maybe if you could even share a little bit about that, because you kind of raised that point a little bit.
Well, you know, what's fascinating is as growing up, I still have relatives in Indonesia. We would go back there every few years when I was growing up, and there's like a market of products in Asia for like skin lightening, like in the Philippines or Indonesia, right? Like in Indonesia, for example, if you have like your Chinese blood, you're lighter skinned. If you're more native Indonesian, you're darker skinned. And then you have this market for these products, and it's really eye-opening and fascinating, like just the intensity that we have in our society, like around that.
Can I share a point on that? Because it's really, I go back to Vietnam every 3 or 4 years. And again, growing up in Seattle, I didn't see a lot of sun. Moving to California, I got a convertible car first thing, because I was like, sun all the time. And what's interesting is when I go back to Vietnam, I'm an absolute freak, even though I am 100% Asian. It's because my darker skin, and because I have a tattoo, a really large tattoo on my arm. And so in Vietnam, if tattoos are a sign of being part of a gang. So when I go running through the villages, etc., people like scatter because they're afraid I'm like part of a gang. And the other reason that you'll see a lot of Asians, Vietnamese women cover their skin, you'll see large gloves, visor, veil, etc., is because in Vietnam, they classify, if you're poor, you work out in the fields, you're very dark. If you're rich, you're able to stay inside or don't even need to work or have a job inside. And so that's one of the reasons why Vietnamese women try to cover themselves a lot, is that they really connect dark skin with being poor and lower class, and lighter skin being upper class and rich. So I'm an absolute freak. You know, whenever I go back to Washington also, they're like, wow, you're so tan.
And this is just another example of how racism is so pervasive, and not just in the US. It is everywhere, and it drives so much of the perceptions and stereotypes, not just so then when you add on when these groups come to the US, and then there's another layer of stereotyping, it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that thread, that pull through around skin tone and North and versus South, Pacific Islander versus not. In terms of race, one of the things that I was curious about is the perceived tension between Black and Asians in the narrative, the media landscape. You know, the recent Stop the Asian Hate moniker that happened as a result, and the Chauvin trial, and how it seemed as though the media kind of did a quick pivot, and all of the volume and the awareness that was happening around the anti-Asian hate kind of dissipated, at least in my view. And I was wondering, do you, Katherine, Annie, Stella, I'll start with Katherine, do you share that? Do you see that? How would you translate kind of the emerging narrative, or maybe it hasn't been an emerging narrative, it's always been there, around this tension between the Asian community and the Black community and their experience with racism?
Yeah, you know, that actually has two sides to the coin. I mean, there's definitely, I think, the model minority of the stereotype of model minority for Asians has always been used against the Black community, and the Black community, I think, rightfully so. There is tension between the two communities, but there's also a lot of collaboration. I mean, we forget that, like, when Malcolm X died, when he was assassinated, Yuri Kochiyama was the one who was holding his head when he died. She was right there with him in the civil rights movement. So much of the civil rights movement was to help lay the groundwork for Asian rights as well. And it's really frustrating because, but this is politics. This is a lot of political maneuvering by groups that used our groups to pit us against each other. Because if one group was making inroads in an area, they used another group to dispel it or to put against them so that they could stop the momentum. I mean, this is something that's been going on for so many years in the U.S. and not just in the U.S. This happens everywhere. But unfortunately, I think that media plays into this too. I mean, I think that if you look at some of the videos of the anti-Asian hate crimes, most of them that we saw over and over again were of Black perpetrators. But if you look at the actual numbers, it actually doesn't show that the majority of perpetrators were Black. It's just that there's this pervasive story that keeps on coming back. And I think it's preventing us from moving forward in any kind of racial discussions that are meaningful. Because if you're constantly having to say, well, Black Lives Matter is having their moment, now we can't focus on this. Oh, now it's the Asian hate crimes, we're going to forget the Black Lives Matter. That's not what it's about. We have to work together. We have to really get to the core of what the racism is, though, if we're going to make any inroads. So I think that that what you're asking here, there is tension, and there's a lot of mistrust between the two groups, because there's certain things that in history, you know, like I said, model minority is one of the things that does come up most of all, like in the LA riots. I mean, if you look at the history of the LA riots, it was very much, it was driven by the one video of Rodney King being beaten, but then there was so much racial tension in LA between the Korean community and the Black community, perpetuated by so much other than, I mean, there's so much packed in there. So I think that the question, I mean, I could go on and on about that, so I'm going to stop here, but I'm just saying that there's two sides to the story. Asians and Blacks have worked together very well in many communities, and then there's also a lot of divide.
Katherine, I absolutely want to agree with you on that. I feel like that collaboration isn't always shared broadly, so that people can see that there is a partnership and there are leaders out there that are collaborating and working together. I think to your point of kind of the model minority, I think how that's played out, particularly I think in the business sense also, is that, you know, for some Blacks and many Blacks, this is not true obviously for everyone, but there is this perception by many that, you know, Asians are admonished as being smart and being successful. And so, you know, the executive positions and VP level positions and, you know, those positions that many Blacks feel like should be opportunities that Blacks are able to take advantage of are afforded to Asians. And so that, I think that's where some of that kind of tension and animosity that you were talking about comes from, because there's this perception. And then, you know, the media and groups out there that want to continue to pit us against each other, I think, you know, try to pick out those pieces and continue to push that narrative so that there continues to be that tension amongst us.
It feels like, I mean, when I was learning around, getting my understanding around the model minority framing, I was like, that would be so cool as a Black person if we were ascribed these positive attributes. But as I got to dig into it deeper, it feels like it's a double-edged sword. It's the push of that stereotype onto the API community, and it's how it's absorbed. And I would love for Stella to talk about, you know, give some insight as to what is that back and forth, what is that double-edged sword that comes with having that stereotype, that labeling.
Yeah, it's a precarious double-edged sword. I think in my upbringing too, like growing up in the society, the communities I was in, it was just extra pressure because you were surrounded by like similar like people and similar households and families. I think that model minority myth just creates immense pressure for you to perform and succeed. You know, you have the running joke of like the Asian tiger moms, right? That expect you to go to an Ivy League and you have to be a doctor, like that's only your path forward. And so one of the things I think that I'm proud of in my background and what distinguishes like the path that I took and having this career in HR is it's not as traditional as like your Asian parents would expect. And in fact, when you're growing up in like an Asian household, you're not necessarily brought up and taught the skills and the, you know, that you need to know to thrive and be successful in a corporate environment. So it's like you have to be able to develop that for yourself and learn that for yourself. Because otherwise there's a very like just myopic view of what you're expected to be. Like straight A's isn't good enough, you know, you have to go to be a doctor and that's kind of like your destiny. So if you multiply that by like if 55% of your high school class is that way, like you're in that competition mode. And heck, no wonder that kind of transverses over into mental health. You know, you see a lot of mental health challenges like abroad in Japan and with that performance pressure of like what happens downstream with that.
Can I also add that that this actually manifests itself in the corporate world? And so when you look at the general population, there are a lot. I mean, I think the largest number of people in poverty, there is a huge population of Asians that are in that group. And we don't ever hear really about them. And so there's a political thing, like I said. But in corporate America, there is a model minority stereotype. Like there's your engineers, but for Asians and especially Asian women, and this is just my opinion and my experience, is that people expect you to be more silent, more subservient, more I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me throughout my career, even at Starbucks. And how if I spoke up, which I do, people would always make very passive aggressive comments like, oh, like you're very passionate about this, or this is, the kind of comments, there were code words for, we don't expect you to really speak your mind, or this is not the way we do things. And so I think it does hurt us in the corporate area, because if you don't follow what other people think that you might be, and then they don't listen to you. I mean, women have the same issue, but there's another layer of being Asian on top of that. It's sort of like you speak up and all of a sudden you're a troublemaker, or that's not the company way to speak out. Oh, because you're an Asian woman. So I think that there's a lot of these very subconscious things, but they play out very deliberately, that people will make comments about. And I think that it ties to the model minority myth.
That's a really good call. And just to add on really quick to what Katherine said, like if you around you, you don't see a lot of role models and leaders that look like you. And I remember distinctly I was at Starbucks when the whole, Philadelphia incident happened in 2018. We did the sensitivity training, and there was a question in there that said, leaders that look like you, can you identify that? And it's like, you don't have as much resource and example role modeling in that sense.
Yeah. I want to dig deeper into the whole notion, the cultural piece around speaking up and not speaking up, and what that means. I think from a Black cultural perspective, and this is the lens I sit in, it's like we're always trying to throw our voice into the ether. And with the cultural norm, and correct me if I'm wrong, or the perceived norm that Asians are more quiet and kind of deal with things in-house, what is the role of Asian then in activism and kind of standing up for themselves? I want to say that when the Black Lives Movement was at the height of it last summer, that I was really just taken aback and pleasant surprised to see marches in Japan and certain Asia Pacific countries where they were advocating for Black Lives Matter. And I want to know, from your point of view, given that cultural set of being quiet and internalizing your struggles, what's the role of activism? Is there a role of activism, and what does that look like now in this new universe? Katherine.
So actually, there's a long history of activism from Asian Americans, and also in Asia. And if you think about it, goes back to what I was saying before, is that people make a conscious choice not to hear or see us. But there were riots, there were demonstrations years ago when Vincent Chin was murdered because he was mistaken for a Japanese auto worker when he was a Chinese man in Detroit during the height of the auto crisis. And but we have activists that are throughout our history. Carlos Bulasan, who was a Filipino activist in Seattle, there's a lot of activism that was happening around the canneries that were up in Alaska. And so there's a long history of activism and speaking out. And that's why if you look throughout history with the civil rights movement, there are many Asians that are in that movement. Again, I think it's the stereotype, but of course, I do have to say though that there is some truth to that, because when Asians were during the Japanese internment or the Chinese immigration laws that were the anti-exclusion laws, Asian children were taught to assimilate, speak the language, don't make waves, don't make noise, because you don't want to stand out and have somebody target you. So there is an element to that, but I would argue that it's not a blanket thing across the board, because if that were the case, we would not have seen all these activists out there. It's not a surprise to me to have seen demonstrations, and we have heroes out there that have been active. But you're right. I mean, you run the gamut of both sides.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anyone else want to add to that? Annie?
Yeah, I'll add to it. And I'll share a little bit about activism and how it ties back to the model minority myth, because and how it manifests even locally for me. So in my neighborhood, I had a really great real estate agent who shared with me an insight that a lot of the American people in my neighborhood would hate me. And it's because they believe that as a Tiger mom, my kids would prevent their kids from getting into Ivy League schools. And I was shocked by this. I'm like, really? People are going to hate me. And there is a perception and how it plays into like, we just had the Oscars. And I don't know if many of you remember in 2016 when Chris Rock hosted, he had on the stage, how they had the PwC accountants tabulating the award winners. He had 3 Asian children come up on stage in tuxedos to represent PwC. And so that manifests in our corporate workplaces because people expect the Asians to be in the back office, smart people doing the accounting, and that feeds into it. And so when people meet me, they're like, wow, your English is amazing. I don't even detect an accent since you're an immigrant. And people don't expect me to be in recruiting because they say, wow, that's a really extroverted kind of role. I mean, I'm surprised, they're surprised I'm not in finance or something. So it's always interesting to hear. And I'm glad that I can be an example for others who couldn't foresee an Asian being vocal, and it translates then into activism. One of the reasons I was really passionate about leading the ERG was to share that, yes, Asians, we can speak up and we will speak up for our race and for all underrepresented groups.
Annie, I'm so glad you said that about just the perception of how people believe that Asians can only work in certain departments or areas, because I too have seen where you have leaders that are more willing to bring Asians into finance, the finance department, but they're not willing to maybe think about, bringing in great Asian candidates in other areas. And it's part of the work that, I'm constantly trying to get managers and leaders to do, is to challenge those stereotypes and biases that prevent us from thinking outside the box and recognizing that talent exist everywhere, and people can do lots of different jobs. So I'm really glad that you brought that point up.
Great.
So as we're heading into AAPI month in May, we're just 2 days away from that day. What are some things that we can kind of think about in terms of, I guess I should frame it like, how do you normally celebrate this month, or do we celebrate it? Is the month now more about activism and elevating the voices and issues that matter, or is it more of the cultural pieces that some other heritage months share? Pride, it's the parade and it's all of this. But I don't know that even in my purview around AAPI, if I've actually seen how it's celebrated. And I would love to get some insight into that. I know, Katherine, you're on the side of the Wing Luke Museum. Maybe we can start with you on kind of how does that come to life in this month? How do you personally celebrate and acknowledge the month? Would love to hear that. And then we'll take Annie and Stella after that.
Yeah, so I celebrate it every day because I can't get away from it. So but no, I mean that is true. I have 2 mixed race kids, and I tell them all the time that you need to be proud of both sides. Maybe a little bit more of the Asian side, because that's the side that gets attacked more. But I mean, because I think it's really important to say that we are not just celebrating it during a month. The month to me is awareness. So I use the AAPI Heritage Month for awareness. And I am on the board of the Wing Luke Asian Museum, and that it's a resource. So I would say that if I was to tell other people, I got so many texts and messages, during these anti-hate crimes, and I've had some things happen against me, and I posted them, and people would, say, oh, I'm so sorry this happened. I'm holding space for you. And I'm kind of like, I don't need you to hold space for me. I don't know what to do with that. Like, put it to better use. But what I think you should do is take that space and go and learn something about the history of AAPIs. Go learn about the contributions. Go learn about the stereotypes. As a child growing up in Bellevue, I hate Bellevue because I have these memories. I was one of the few Asians there for a long time before we had an influx of refugees that came in. And watching movies when I was growing up, it was so cringy. Like, you're watching movies with your friends, and then something comes up, and you see, oh, fucking, oops, I'm sorry, an Asian comes on, and you're like, I know what's going on. I know what's going to come up here. Long Duk Dong, or me so horny. That kind of BS. And how, I don't know if I don't know how many of you can feel like the wanting to disappear into yourself. You know, I'm aging myself with these movies, but I mean, it was a real thing. And so to me, I want to celebrate that we are, like, I'm so proud of being Asian. I've always been really proud of being Asian. And I think that, you know, the education piece, though, again, to understand, because even a lot of Asians don't understand the history of Asians in the US. It is so important, because that's why you speak out, because you know what you're trying to, you know what you're standing up for. So so celebration, you know, of course we eat a lot of Asian food, but we do it all the time. Really, our celebration is Chinese New Year. So, but I think that, again, I call it AAPI Heritage Month, because that's to really identify with, you know, how important it is to recognize the diversity of who we are, and really, again, it all comes down to education for me.
Annie?
Yeah.
Or Stella? Stella, you came off mute first.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I wholeheartedly agree with Katherine. Not a lot to add. I think over time, my hope is that it can become, you know, the Heritage Month is more mainstream, you know, so that it's more mainstream, it's more visible, because it is all about the understanding and the learning aspect of it. For myself, I am the same with Katherine. I have a lot of pride, but I think about, like, how do we bring it more to the mainstream and then balance it with the activism piece? So it's not just the heritage, but also then kind of speaking up for our history, for what we're taking. And then for me personally too, I think it's important for me to, like, teach my kids, pass that on to them. And then so they start developing their pride early and understanding early for them.
Yeah, I'll just add to it, you know, for my kids also know that activism and education is the way that we celebrate. And it's been great to leading the ERG at Zwift and planning events for AAPI month. It's been great to talk to my kids about what I'm doing, what we're doing as a company, so that they'll come to expect that in future companies that they go to work for, that we will celebrate, we will be active. And I was going to share that, you know, I'm able to help guide our $25,000 donation from Zwift to a local nonprofit group, which is great, because they hadn't done that before. So I share that with my kids to say that we face microaggressions every day, and to be sensitive to them, to be aware of them, but then to turn it into action where we can educate and help others. So, you know, it's little things like I get all the time. I used to get when I was interviewing, I would get when I would go visit places, they're like, "Where are you from? You're so exotic looking." And I just couldn't play into it. I would say, "North Seattle." And they're like, no, like, really, where are you from? And I'm like, "Oh, Bothell. I grew up in Bothell." Because I just don't even want to give them, you know, I just don't want to give them anything. And yeah, so just having these conversations with my kids, and again, celebrating that we are Asian, and every day, but especially in AAPI month, sharing with them the ways that you can make a difference, whether at home or in the corporate area.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, right now I'm currently at Microsoft, and a lot of the conversation is around, you know, the upcoming AAPI month. And I would say that, to Katherine's point, it's really about amplifying the voices and stories of our AAPI community. And I believe, Katherine, you're working on something right now that is akin to that tone. Can you share a little bit about what that is? And James, if Alaska is doing anything that might be interesting to note here that you're able to share, I would love to be able to take that, so that all of us who are in our corporate environments can have the right footing in terms of how we show up in support of our AAPI community.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. We're standing up a campaign called "Our Stories Are Your Stories," and we have we're basically launching a campaign to put out videos of Asian stories. So we're not trying to talk about stereotypes and discrimination or model minority stories. It's real stories of who we are. We're human. We're here. We've, you know, the breadth and depth of who we are. So the video series, it has several people who are well known, and then we want to launch the video, and several companies are joining us in this journey, and I hope that all of your companies might do the same. But it's basically we're putting out a video that we've created. We have an all Asian production team, and it's a video starting with Doug Baldwin, a Seahawks player, who's Black, but he actually is part Asian. He his story is talking about his Filipino grandmother. And then we have Dr. Vin Gupta, another prominent Asian who is talking about, dealing with the coronavirus, and he's in a very visible role. And then we have Gary Locke. We have a lot of different people, and the goal is to put it out for companies to launch the campaign and tell the stories of the Asians in their organization, their partners, their customers, their employees. And then there's also an ally piece where we are asking allies to tell stories of Asians in their lives. There's a great story. You guys should look this up because it's so touching. But Charles Barkley had this very close relationship with this Chinese man, and their relationship was, their friendship was based on their love for basketball and for their families, and nothing to do with race. And those are the kinds of stories we want to share, that we're just like everybody else. So that campaign's coming out. We're going to be launching it hopefully on Monday. We have several videos that we've just put together, and it's really exciting. We've got some exciting people that are surprises as well that will be coming out. Thank you for giving me time for that.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to share kind of how their organization is looking to amplify Asian voices next month? While you're thinking about that, I do have a question for all of you, and whoever wants to take it first will come off mute. I see you're off mute, James, but the question is, where do you think our society is headed in terms of dealing with our differences? What would progress look like?
No one else is going to go.
Yeah. Good.
All right. I don't mean to dominate this. I do think progress would look like having open discussions, real discussions about race, and having those uncomfortable conversations that we tend not to want to have in this country. I think that if you can't take apart all of the different pieces and really identify where the systemic racism is, then there will not be any progress. And I think, pitting groups against each other is not going to work anymore. We have to be allied in this. And I think education is at the core of it. But also, it's not only about race, though. It also tends to be about economics. There is the economic divide has become so great that racism is sort of, I don't know which one, it's the chicken and egg. I'm not sure which one feeds which, but it's definitely a terrible cycle that we have to really break apart.
I think for me, thanks for sharing that. I think for me, progress is building awareness that, racism, discrimination, and marginalization is happening across the board in all of these different communities, BIPOC communities. While it may look different in the AAPI community versus the Black community, I always say if we all just got together as a community and really rose up as one voice to really kind of, try to impact change, man, that's a powerful thing that we'd be able to do. And I think for me and in Alaska, what we're trying to do during AAPI month is build awareness. And I think I heard Annie and say this, and Katherine say this as well, is how do we build awareness around just educating people, bringing awareness to the AAPI community, so that people can be more empathetic and understand these different communities in ways and maybe they didn't. I know as we've been kind of getting closer to AAPI month, I know that just our BRGs have been sharing with our leadership is just who is encompassed in that community, because a lot of people just haven't even, been educated on, who falls in the Asian community, who falls in the Pacific Islander community, and what things are important. And so I think progress for me feels like, stop kind of isolating that it's one community and it's another community, but it's happening in all of our communities. And again, it might look different, but how do we come together to kind of fight this this issue that's happening to many of us?
Mm-hmm. Because Christine is president of our board, I believe she had a comment that she wanted to share. And I would love for you to jump in, Christine, while we have just a few more minutes before the hour.
It's not because I'm president of the board, but it is because I did have no, I just, it actually, I was thinking about it before Katherine spoke about, the stories is so you guys, I'm a runner, right? Some of you know that. And being in my running group it's probably the most diverse community that I'm in terms of the age range. I'm running with people who are grandparents and people who could be my kids. And I'm running with a lot of ethnically and culturally diverse, much more than when I was at Starbucks. So like the people, but I was really ignorant about the experiences my Asian friends had been having in their lives until the event in Atlanta. And my eyes opened up, and I shared this story on LinkedIn once not too long ago because I didn't know what to do with it. And I was one of my friends, the thought never would have crossed my mind that they were these three women friends of mine, that they were having these experiences because I'd never had that experience. Now I know that sounds ignorant, but that's the truth. I'd never had the experience. And so I never had dealt with the fears and the things that they were dealing with. And on one of our runs, one of my friends, it was a week after Atlanta, and she was scheduled to have she's in sales, business development, and she was scheduled to have a dinner meeting. And she's going to be the only woman. She's Asian. And she was scared to death to go to this business meeting and this business dinner, but it was a multi-million-dollar deal. And so she was actually telling me that she was going to cancel it. And the thought never would have crossed my mind. Never for me. Oh, I'll just go, right? Whatever. Because she didn't want to have to drive there. She didn't want to have to walk in the dark by herself. She was worried that she was going to, potentially be attacked. And I was like, this is ridiculous that she wouldn't be able to go conduct business like I could, and that she had this legitimate fear and she was paralyzed. And I was like, listen, Ritsuko, she's Japanese. I was like, I'll drive you. I'll drive you to and from. I'll be the heavy. I don't know these people, whatever. And she just felt like she had a level of support, and we worked out a plan where she went and she had support, and she ended up, she sent me a text later that day. There was three of us. We're like, we'll do whatever we can. She sent me a text. She's like, later that night, she's like, I got the deal. It was a $2 million deal. Well, she found out 2 weeks later when they actually did the contract, it was a $10 million deal. She almost lost this business deal because she was worried for her life. She was worried that she wouldn't be respected. She was worried for her safety. She was worried for her family and what this could mean to her daughter if something happened to her. And so back to Katherine's point, it just totally opened my mind to I've got a lot of work to do. I've got a lot of privileges with my white privilege and being female. And I'd say I'm just underscore having the conversations. Yeah. Because you have no idea what experience people had. Sorry, it's super emotional for me because I was never crossed my mind that I would be reluctant to go do this, and she was because it's for fear of her life. Anyway, thank you for tonight. You guys did an awesome job. I really learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And I will just continue my own learning. And thanks for letting me share my story because it was very moving. Sorry.
Yes, we just have 90 seconds left. I know Annie wanted to jump in, and then I'm going to punt it back to Marie to close us out.
Yeah, I wanted to share, dovetailing on Christine sharing her friend's story. One of the things I wanted to share in my neighborhood that I've engaged in a lot of conversations with my neighbors is a lot of them have said, I don't know what the Asians are complaining about because, okay, so someone says something, racially charged to you, is that big a deal? And a lot of the neighbors actually say that the Asians are speaking up now. And so they're shocked by it. And so they're thinking that we're making a big deal out of nothing, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And I have to engage in education with them about what it is that I'm going through, just like Christine, found out from her friend, but because a lot of my neighbors think that the Asians are making a big deal out of nothing, to be honest. They're like, what is the big deal about calling it the China virus? What is the big deal? And so it's interesting that a lot of my neighbors, what I think progress will be was when there is understanding, when there's understanding of what we're going through versus just having their own perception of, you're making a big deal.
Thank you for sharing your stories. We are at time. This sounds like we could probably do another one and go a little bit deeper into personal experiences and kind of illuminating the people behind what we are calling AAPI. I want to, before I let you all go, thank our panelists. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to having you back. There is always an open invitation to come and be a part of these types of conversations. So from me to you and from our whole community, thank you for coming and joining us today. I continue to learn and grow every time. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Marie to close us out. Thank you.
This was an incredible afternoon experience. And like I said, during the prep sessions, I was learning quite a bit. And yes, thank you all for sharing your time and your commitment. And to each of you that joined us today, the reality is that you are going to be able to make a difference. Just participating in the conversation and being open, it does a world of good because you are reflecting something back to your communities, to your families, and this is an important conversation to keep having. So yes, we will have another one of these conversations. We will have another panel. This is very, very important that we do this. And so thank you all for joining us today. I know going into next month, I'm going to take it with an even bigger recognition of the importance of Heritage Month. So thank you all for your participation. And just one final thing is please recognize that all of this is done because of our love and commitment and passion for each other. That the strings of Green Apron are wrapping wide and all inclusive. And it is an incredible experience that we get to share with each other. And this is due to volunteers and people committing to do this and bring this because it is so important. So if you're able to, please join us on the platform. Make sure we can find you with the directory. Make sure your business is listed. We want to shop your business. And we want to make sure that we can keep this going. And so I'm going to pull out the NPR pitch here, but I got to make sure each of you pay your dues because this event happens because you've paid your dues. And if you can and are so obligated, make a bigger contribution. It means a lot. We're able to help people with stipends and grants to be able to work on projects. We're able to do a lot more with this. So please, please, keep it going and join us for the next one. I hope to see you all at our new member welcome coffee date next week and for a special event, signature event from Green Apron on May 6th. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.